Welcome to DIA Today, Democracy in America Today. I'm Matt Parks alongside Dave Corbin. Glad to have you with us. We explore the ideas behind today's headlines.
My left eye sees pollution. Those dirty fuels are burning. The earth's whole climate's churning. Clean energy solution. My right eye scans the bill. Fossil fuels are cheap. Wind and solar too steep. Drill, baby, drill. Predefined, misaligned, polarized division. Shuttered mind, worse than blind. 2020 vision.
How are you, Dave?
Doing well, Matt. Saw in our notes that you have an anniversary on Wednesday, you and Rachel, 20th.
20th
That's
anniversary.
that's great, and that your parents' 58th anniversary today.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So yeah, they were celebrating just before we got married, and then we had a big celebration for their 50th a few years ago. My sister organized a surprise, and it was something else. So she did a lot of work on that, and it
That's
came off
awesome.
perfectly. Yeah. So yeah, but 58 years. Congratulations to them. We'd like to have 58, but that'll be pushing it. We didn't get
hmm
married super young, so
hmm
we'll see if we can pull that off. But
Yep.
anyway, grateful for nearly 20 years and certainly would love to have many more.
Amen. That's great.
Well, today we are almost up to the Declaration of Independence. This is our second to last discussion leading up to July 4th, 1776 and July 4th, 2026. And we're looking at the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is a really important document from the standpoint of a model that many states followed. The Bill of Rights there that was listed, the philosophy behind it is very representative of the founders' philosophy. And it's helpful, I think, in some ways for elaborating on some of the points that we see in just really the barest form in the Declaration. So if you want to know what they had in mind as the model for how governments are established or what they should look like, how you balance powers, we'll get obviously a much larger elaboration on those themes in the Federalist Papers. But in the Revolutionary era, it's neat to have a document like this one that we can refer to and sort of check our theories. We think this is how not to interpret the Declaration. Well, here's what Virginia was saying contemporaneously with that, and we can look at other documents. Pennsylvania follows the Virginia Declaration very closely. Some months later, North Carolina, so North and South, we see there's a cluster of ideas that become central and are repeated, sometimes just word for word, as they're adopting these various bills of rights and constitutions during this era. So we're just going to give a little bit of historical context here. There's a lot more that we could say, but if we go to May, last time we were in May with John Witherspoon. If we go to May 6th, 1776, this Virginia group called the Revolutionary Convention, the Fifth Revolutionary Convention, begins to meet in the capital city of Williamsburg. So if we back up just a little bit from there. In 1774, the British governor, of course, of Virginia, Lord Dunsmore, begins to dissolve the House of Burgesses when he doesn't like the kinds of things they're doing in support of Boston in particular. And so the people leadership in Virginia at that point say, look, we can't just dissolve the government. There has to be a government. This is really fundamental theory. And so if the British Crown, through the governor, won't allow us to have a government that really represents us, we'll have to create our own. And so they called periodic conventions. And so you can see beginning in 1774 through 75 and now 76, this series of revolutionary conventions that met together and made important decisions. They were essentially the revolutionary government for the people of Virginia, and in many ways had, although irregular in the origins, had more legitimacy than the established British government that had been on the scene going back in some ways all the way to the days of Jamestown almost. So that May 6th, that group begins to meet in Williamsburg. A few days after that, in Philadelphia, the Second Continental Congress advises colonies to begin to form pro-independence governments. So some of these colonies are still very much under the thumb of the British Crown and are not really being allowed to respond to these events. And so essentially they're saying, do what Virginia's been doing. And if you don't have a regular government that can support independence, establish your own ad hoc government. And so a few days after that, the Continental Congress advises the colonies, the people of the colonies, to disavow loyalty oaths and any kind of remaining attachment to British colonial institutions. So this is really a pretty significant step toward independence. Right? We're saying we're throwing off the old government and we're beginning to organize, at least at the local level, the state level, colonial level, future governments that can establish with legitimacy the law, maintain order, etc., for the people of those communities. That same day, back now to the Virginia Convention, they pass two resolutions that really orient Virginia toward independence. So the first one instructs the delegates from Virginia who are at the Continental Congress to make a motion in favor of independence. And so you have to recognize that this is sort of like a meeting of ambassadors, right? So these are representatives who come with instructions and they can't go beyond their instructions. And so one of the reasons why July 4th happens on July 4th, and we'll see July 2nd, another key date in the run-up to independence, is that certain colonies were waiting to get instructions allowing them to vote in favor of independence. So you had to have those instructions in place before you could actually vote in favor of that resolution. And so Virginia formally instructs its delegates to the Second Continental Congress to support independence and to make a motion, and they will do that, as we'll see in our discussion next time. They also locally form a committee to create a Declaration of Rights, which is what we're talking about today, and a constitution so that they'll have a government, a state government in place, as it turns out, by the end of June. And they'll be able to then operate whenever the rest of the colonies come together with some sort of joint statement or joint operation, joint government. They'll be ready at the state level to join the cause and support the cause.
So in this interim, Matt, between 1774 and 1776, there's this ad hoc government, but are they collecting taxes, or is it pretty much do unto yourself what you do, and there's no rule in place? Because you'd imagine many people weren't following instructions by the British, and there was just kind of a temporary colonial government in place. I mean, did they just kind of care for themselves during this 2-year period?
Yeah, I think they're working toward exercising the powers of sovereignty, and I think that's part of what's going on here in establishing this constitution, so that you'll have formal institutions, so you can say, yeah, this is legitimate taxation. We're going to have to raise armies. Of course, there's the local militia that's by this point well involved in the military operations. Obviously, George Washington is commander in chief over the entire Continental Army. So, yeah, I mean, I think this is they're feeling their way toward the
Yep.
exercise of sovereign power. And one of the fundamental institutions you have to have is some kind of representative body
Yep.
that the people can look to for guidance and direction. And so these conventions are sort of taking on that role. It was in one of the earlier meetings of these conventions that Patrick Henry gives his famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech. We talked about that earlier
Mhm.
in this sequence. So, these are the meetings that are shaping opinion, that are directing the people in terms of how to respond to these events. And things are happening very quickly. This is a summer that's going to lead to a fall that's very, very difficult for the cause of the patriots. Washington and his army are going to be kicked out of Manhattan. The British will take over Manhattan and be there for years. And there's a series of losses in that region. The Hessians are coming, the German mercenary troops. And so it's a very difficult period and not at all clear that the military side of this is going to sustain the political side. Nevertheless, in confidence that they can move forward, that there's enough revolutionary support and internal resources and perhaps potentially foreign resources to sustain this effort over time, Virginia's organizing. The people of the colonies are gathering in Philadelphia. All these things are moving forward, even while it's a very dicey situation militarily.
Yeah. And that was my second question, contextually. You're running a public relations campaign as well. I mean, when
Hmm.
a group like Virginia meets and then declares these rights, that's going to be shared with people in Philadelphia, New York City,
Right.
Exeter, New Hampshire, and vice versa, right? So this compounding effect of, okay, you're doing it, we're doing it, everyone, we're being
Hmm.
instructed to do it, and that's important, right? Because you don't want to be part of a lost cause, right? Even if you believe in it, right? To have that
Right.
reinforcement that everyone's working on this front.
I mean, the documents reflect that, as I said earlier, as the different states are developing their first constitutions, there's a very free borrowing of texts, and there's that. I think it reflects a consensus, but it also is just it's hard work writing constitutions, and there's a lot of things to do. And so, if someone else has gotten it right, you borrow from that heavily, and you can find some local flavor and some of the differences, the things that aren't adopted or the ways the wording changes. But there's a lot of consensus within the revolutionary group around core principles that is going to sustain them through the very difficult times that are coming in the near term into the fall and winter of 1776, 1777.
A large language model, 1776.
Right.
Chat GPT in its time.
Yeah,
Let's get it.
the committees of correspondence are the chat GPT of the day.
Exactly. All right, let's get into the preamble and a lot of this language in the preamble of the convention. It's going to sound familiar because we've seen this in many other writings that we've covered. There is an overview of the previous, decade, 13 years, in terms of the attempts made by the colonies to make appeals to the king and the parliament. And these appeals have just been, set aside, and more and more tyrannical acts, insult, oppression, has occurred on the part of the British Crown and the British Parliament. So that all to say, we have tried, we have tried, we have tried, we have tried,
Mhm.
and we are left. And this is the end of this preamble. We have no alternative left but an abject submission to the will of those overbearing tyrants, or a total separation from the crown and government of Great Britain, uniting and exerting the strength of all America for defense, and forming alliances with foreign powers for commerce and aid in war. And then a key statement: wherefore, appealing to the searcher of hearts for the sincerity of former declarations expressing our desire to preserve the connection with that nation, Great Britain, and that we are driven from that inclination by their wicked counsels and the eternal law of self-preservation. And here you begin to see that language, eternal law, general principles, that at a certain point, if someone is governing you tyrannically, you have the right, as the delegates will do here, to make a declaration and to employ whatever measures are needed, right, in order to secure a new government that regulates everything that's needed within a colony, and everything that's going to be needed to bring the colonies together. So at the end of this preamble, they have resolved unanimously that a committee be appointed to prepare a Declaration of Rights and such a plan of government as will be most likely, on the important line, to maintain peace and order in this colony and secure substantial and equal liberty to the people. So peace, order, substantial and equal liberty. That's the end of government, and that's what they're doing here. So when we continue the timeline, Matt, that you started earlier,
Mhm.
okay, what happens thereafter?
Okay, so this is middle of May, 1776. Beginning of June, June 7th, Richard Henry Lee, in response to that instruction in the Continental Congress, moves that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. And we'll tell more of that story next time, but that's the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. 5 days after that, the Virginia Declaration of Rights was adopted. So this is where we're recording this Monday the 15th. So just 3 days ago was the 250th anniversary of the Virginia Declaration of Rights. The principal author, George Mason, and so we're going to go through that in some detail. And then 2.5 weeks after that, they adopt a constitution. They elect Patrick Henry the first governor, and essentially they've now declared independence because they now have an operational government. It all happens the same day. There's no waiting period. They're up and running by the end of June 1776. So when July 4th takes place, when the Declaration of Independence is actually asserted, they have already got all the institutions in place to maintain order and preserve the liberty and equality of the people moving forward as Virginians.
So let's get into the Declaration of Rights. So this is June 12th, 1776. And this first statement of the Declaration of Rights begins with kind of the foremost inherent right that you have as a human being. And that is that all men are by nature equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, of which, when they enter into a state of society, they cannot by any compact deprive or divest their posterity, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. This is Locke 101, John Locke 101, correct? This is his argument that he made, some 100 years prior in his second treatise of government. But to do that in a philosophic treatise or a political treatise is one thing, right? To make it the first principle of your government, to actualize theory into practice is another, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that lays down some markers. Obviously, we're talking about a Virginia society that is very heavily involved in slavery, and the slave trade will be for some time to come. There's other elaborations of these principles that maybe aren't there on the ground in 1776. But what are you doing? You're establishing a moral framework for your understanding of rightful government. And you're saying that, these are rights inherent in human beings. They can't be bargained away. They can't be negotiated away. We don't have a right to simply decide, you know what, we'd rather not fight. It's a lot of trouble. The British, sure, they're taking away our fundamental liberties, but that's okay. We'll save that trouble, that problem for another day. And then it's also, I think, helpful here just to see, again, kind of an elaboration of some of the ideas in the Declaration of Independence. So pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. And you see safety and happiness all over the place in the Revolutionary era. Safety is the beginning of government. Happiness is the ultimate end. And we come together out of a need for safety, for basic protection, but that's not really the ultimate goal. And we see this all the way going back to Aristotle. You come together for the sake of living, but really the city exists ultimately for the sake of living well. And this is the modern American version of that, from safety to happiness. And we'll see that show up again many times in these state declarations of rights, in the private writings of the founders and the Federalist. This is the way they think about the job of government, to protect people, but then allow them a context in which they can actually do more than simply live, but they can live according to the very nature that's being appealed to as the ground for their rights and their equality.
And you mentioned that Mason is the author, George Mason is the author of these Declaration of Rights. Certainly they're coming from various sources, so Mason's not crafting this unilaterally.
Right.
But Mason is a great foe of slavery, right? Well, is that correct? Like he was someone
And yet a
who,
slave owner. Yeah. So
right. So Mike, and you may not know the answer to this question, but is there something written between the lines here that that will lead, right, to the argument for the application of this principle, right, to all, including slaves? Do you get any sense from any of these early writers that we get this on paper now, and it'll be a placeholder for future just efforts?
I think there's some that have that in mind, and there's others that probably don't. I mean, we think about, you were referring to the preamble of those resolutions that led to this document, and one of the things they complain about is the British stirring up their slaves and
Yeah.
offering them freedom as a way of trying to improve the chances of the British cause, right? So they're complaining about that, and I guess you can understand maybe why, but that doesn't show a lot of forward thinking in terms of freeing slaves in the long run. Now, on the other hand, very similar language in the Massachusetts state constitution was used by the Supreme Court of that state to essentially say slavery is over. You said it. All men are equally
Yep.
free and independent, are born equally free and independent. And so slavery is obviously incompatible with that.
Yep.
So that didn't happen in 13 states. It happened in one state, but it was laying down some principles. Of course, we'll see efforts to restrict the slave trade under the Constitution and the progressive labors of many ultimately toward the end of slavery. But I think, once the principle's there on paper, it's a rallying point. And that's something that you see in this generation. You see that, say, in the period around the Missouri Compromise. You see that in Lincoln's day. You see that all the way down to Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, right? Here's a check that we're still waiting to cash. And so there's, I think, something about putting that down on paper and the inescapable logic that comes from it that, whether consciously or unconsciously, leads ultimately down a pathway toward freedom.
Well, let's move to the second principle, which flows from the first, right? So if there is, in the nature of things, that all men are by nature equally free and independent, then secondly, that all power is vested in and consequently derived from the people. The magistrates are their trustees and servants, and at all time amenable to them, right? So from equality flows consent, the consent of the people. That whenever you establish a government, that power has been delegated to that government by the people, and that government is responsible to the people. Another key concept of American founding thought.
Absolutely. And so recognize that leaders aren't superiors. This follows, like you said, logically from their principle of equality. They're people from the common group, elevated in office, but not in any other way. And therefore, they have to do the job they've been given to do. And they don't have inherent power or inherent right to establish for themselves little fiefdoms of, personally advantageous ways of doing things. It's to promote the public good. That's the job they've been given, and that's the job they're going to be held accountable to.
Which is principle three. That government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community. Of all the various modes and forms of government, that is best, which is capable of producing the greatest degree of happiness and safety, and is most effectually secured against the danger of maladministration. And that whenever any government shall be found inadequate or contrary to these purposes, a majority of the community hath an indubitable, unalienable, and indefeasible right to reform, alter, or abolish it in such manner as shall be judged most conducive to the public weal. So here, a couple things. What is the end of government? The common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, and inherent within their right to found a government is their right to revolt against a government and put in its place a government that is most conducive to this end. Here, I think it's interesting when we look forward over American history, civilization, and culture, when you put in words such as common benefit, protection, security, happiness, a lot of what changes over the course of American political history is our definition of what is meant by common benefit, protection, and security. I mean, there's no social security program in place in 1790 or 1800. That's an added definition 150 years later. So, all to say for the audience, which you know well, that I mean, your early definitions of how you see the role of government and what you see its responsibility, those can be changed. Those can change over time, and that points out the character of the people at that time and the expectation of what a government can do. And I think here, even though you're using these statements, you still have a very limited government. I can't imagine that, as Patrick Henry becomes governor over Virginia, that he has, some bureaucracy that he's working with to oversee the administration of Virginia. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I don't think anything like the administrative state is there in Williamsburg in 1776. So you're right. I mean, these are terms that are broad terms. Now they're often terms of art, and this is important to recognize that these are terms that aren't just lifted out of the air. They're terms that are well-defined in legal precedent, English common law, Blackstone. I mean, you can go back and you can find that these ideas have some content behind them. So there is a theory that kind of holds together. Well, what do we mean by common benefit? What kind of protection are we talking about? What kind of security is really in view here? And you can distill that from the various writings of this time, and from this, let's say go back to the 1760s up to the Federalist in the 1780s and 90s, right? There's a kind of revolutionary vocabulary that you can become familiar with that puts more content into some of these terms than is immediately apparent when you just the words on the paper.
One thing I ought to note too, right, that we had seen, right, these comments on what the best government is from John Adams and his thoughts on government, right? The best government is a one that produces the greatest degree of happiness and safety and secures against maladministration. And certainly Adams was very concerned, given his understanding of human nature, as is the case of the authorship of these rights, that you have to put in safeguards so there is not maladministration, and some of those safeguards are how you set up the institutions of government. And you see this in the fourth principle, that no man or set of men are entitled to exclusive or separate emoluments or privileges from the community, but in consideration of public services, which, not being descendable, neither ought the offices of magistrate, legislator, or judge be hereditary, right? So you're going to have a popularly elected government in which offices must be earned. They cannot be inherited.
Yeah, and this is obviously an important break from the British president, the House of Lords, the King. These are heritable offices, and so you have them because of who your father was. That's not how it's going to be in the United States. And an office, again, it's all tied to this notion of public service. You earn your office, you earn the emoluments, the benefits, the salary, etc. of the office by doing the public good, not by being the seventh descendant of this one person who happened to show up at this time and establish proprietary rights over this large area of land.
Okay, fifth principle, that the legislative and executive powers of the state should be separate and distinct from the judicative, and that the members of the two first may be restrained from oppression by feeling and participating the burthens of the people. They should at fixed periods be reduced to a private station, return into that body from which they were originally taken, and the vacancies be supplied by frequent, certain, and regular elections in which all or any part of the former members to be again eligible or ineligible as the laws shall direct. So a rotation of officers, and within, right, three distinct branches of government that have three distinct roles. Here once again, John Locke. What's the role of a legislature? To make laws. What's the role of the executive, right? To administer those laws. What's the role of the judicative branch, right? To make sure that those laws are constitutional. And so separation of powers with a recognition that for the executive and legislative branches, there ought to be rotation.
Yeah, you want to have frequent elections. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily throw everybody out, and you don't even have to have term limits necessarily, according to the language of this provision. But it's important that there be regular opportunities for the people to pass judgment on their leaders and just to reaffirm their confidence in this leader or to withhold that confidence and pass it to somebody else. So there needs to be some way of holding people accountable. We recognize there are other mechanisms for holding office holders accountable, but the most reliable and the most regular is elections. And so regular elections have to be part of the system.
All right, I like the sixth principle. I was walking past a King Soopers on Saturday, and there was this gentleman trying to get signatures. I'm not yet a Colorado resident, for making sure there was a ID to get your ballots, absentee
Oh, yeah.
ballots.
Yep.
This is very clear in Principle 6,
Hmm.
that elections of members to serve as representatives of the people in assembly ought to be free, and that all men, having sufficient evidence of permanent common interest with and attachment to the community, have the right of suffrage and cannot be taxed or deprived of their property for public uses without their own consent, or that of their representatives so elected, nor bound by any law to which they have not in like manner assented for the public good. I love the two words, sufficient evidence, that
Mhm.
you are who you say you are, and a resident when you're making a vote. I think that's something that we could all pretty much agree upon or should agree upon, right? That you have to be a real person, right,
Mhm.
who is part of what's taking place kind of within a jurisdiction to be able to vote as to what that jurisdiction does. So, I mean, real clearly here, principles of qualifications for voting are, permanent common interest and attachment to the community. Uh, that's, I think, required, right? And it's essential.
Yeah, and I think this is a nice way of distilling a lot of the debates that we have. Right? Here's a principle that we can appeal to and say, okay, we don't want people voting in elections who don't have a permanent common interest with the community. If you just show up 2 days before election to vote in the election and then go back somewhere else, it's not right for you to participate in that election. If you have some reason for wanting something contrary to the fundamental good of the community, that's problematic. Right? There needs to be some evidence that you are a member, a true member of this community, attached to the community, aiming for the good of the community. Now, we're not going to have ideological tests embedded in all this, but some sense of, and then this has been interpreted various ways. So initially, this was about property, at least partly about property. You had property there that was a permanent commitment. You owned land. Now we knew you were here. You weren't just passing through. Now that came to be seen as contrary to the best understanding of who ought to vote, but you can see how that was an elaboration of this principle. And of course there were lines between white and black that were drawn under this principle inappropriately, arguing, well, you had to be white to have a permanent common interest with the community. No, that's not true. That was an arbitrary distinction, not grounded in right. But the labor over time to work out what it means to be a rightful voter can always go back to a principle like this. And I think if we could use that, as you're suggesting, Dave, maybe we could make some progress on coming up with voter eligibility laws and checking IDs and these sort of basic things that would maintain the integrity of elections without threatening the right of people that qualify under this description being able to vote.
Yeah, and I think it's just sad in that you look at the movement toward gerrymandering and
Yeah.
carving out districts, and there's just a clear understanding of those who are behind this that there is no common interest, right? There is the interest that our group has, and we have an interest in making sure that the voters within said district will vote for us. And that's how we're going to carve it out. We're going to look toward the final vote that is based upon ideological difference rather than common interest. All right, let's move to the seventh principle, that all power of suspending laws or the execution of laws by any authority without consent of the representatives of the people is injurious to their rights and ought not to be exercised. And here you see this principle would be kind of a direct response to what has taken place as the British have kind of closed off any type of self-government for the American colonials.
Yeah, and you see just a fundamental principle, the rule of law. We can't have laws being arbitrarily suspended. And the importance of the role of the representatives of the people, that's another critical element of all this, to see how the people are acting through the representatives and confirming or denying powers that the rest of the government would exercise.
Okay, so as we move to the eighth principle forward, you begin to see some things that will show up in the Bill of Rights later on, amended to the Constitution. Principle 8, that in all capital or criminal prosecutions, a man hath a right to demand the cause and nature of his accusation, to be confronted with the accusers and witnesses, to call for evidence in his favor, and to a speedy trial. Principle 9, that excessive bail ought not to be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Principle 10, the general warrants whereby any officer or messenger may be commanded to search suspected places without evidence of a fact committed, or to seize any person or persons not named, ought not to be granted. Principle 11, that in controversies respecting property and in suits between man and man, the ancient trial by jury is preferable to any other. So really, the summary of principles 8 through 11, these fundamental due process protections derive from English tradition and common law. And like as you mentioned in our notes, preview of the Bill of Rights amendments 4 through 8. A lot of this is going to sound common. Principle 12, that the freedom of the press is one of the greatest bulwarks of liberty and can never be restrained but by despotic governments. You need a free press. You need the opportunity to voice opinions. You need the opportunity for people to debate with one another. And it's not the worst thing in the world for people to be critical of government or how they're being governed. Their voice will often direct them or direct others to a more just cause. Principle 13, that a well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people, trained to arms, is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. A people that is born equal ought to consent to its government, certainly capable of defending itself. And that power ought to be, that military power in that militia ought to be subordinated to the civil power, right? That we ought not to have a military government. And then the 14th principle, that the people have a right to uniform government, and therefore that no government separate from or independent of the government of Virginia ought to be erected or established within the limits thereof. This is interesting, right? Because I don't know if this is where they're going, but when you get to the 10th Amendment, for example, right, and the securing of states' rights, is that where they're going here, Matt, with this idea?
I think it could be, but I think the primary concern is going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. We have this sort of dual governments. We've got a governor who's claiming to still be governor, even though he's fled Virginia, and we've got these irregular conventions that are meeting. You have the old institutions of the House of Burgesses. So what they're saying is we're not going to have two different governments in Virginia. This is the government. This is the legitimate government of Virginia that we're establishing here. And now that also has some bearing on relationship with the national government. And only by the consent of Virginia adopting the Constitution will then there be a national government that has some jurisdiction over Virginia as well. But that's a discussion for a future day. And I think you're right. There's certainly a concern that they not lose fundamental rights and privileges either to some parallel British institutions or to some overarching national government that might come down the road.
Because a lot of the anti-federalists, I mean, this is later on, right, 11 or 12 years, are drawn, right, from some of this crew. And I mean, they're throughout the colonies,
Yeah.
but there's a good Virginia contingent, right, to that anti-federalist bent, correct?
Mason, Patrick Henry, to name
Yeah,
two. Yeah.
exactly. Well, Principle 15, which I love, that no free government or the blessings of liberty can be preserved to any people, but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, and by frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. Yet there's an argument here for what the rights of man are, but there's also a standard to which we as men, right, ought to aspire to, and we ought to look to fundamental principles like justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue when we're organizing ourselves as a citizenry. So you put in our notes, this is called the Virginia Declaration of Rights, but you could certainly add to that rights and responsibilities.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever you have a statement like this, which is not actionable, but you have a statement of principle, of philosophy, right, of a moral claim in these various declarations of rights, bills of rights of this era, and there are these occasionally, and this is something that we're just asserting to be the facts, right? There's no, what can a judge do with this? Nothing really, but the whole community is guided. We ought to care about the preservation of liberty and a free government. And therefore, we ought to be in all ways available to us as public officials or as private citizens or everything in between, aiming to live up to these claims of justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, virtue. And frequent recurrence to fundamental principles. So I guess I said, what could a judge do with it? Well, that's, I guess, something a judge could do. You can go back to those fundamental principles, right, as a guide as you're adjudicating a particular case between two people. How do you decide who ought to win the case? Well, you go back to first principles. You work from first principles, and I think there's a really wise notion implicit in this that it's easy to lose the principles of your government. Unless you're regularly recurring back to them, unless you're regularly returning to them, reminding yourselves of them. There's a great passage I used as the opening quote for my dissertation from Deuteronomy chapter 8, where there's a warning to the people of Israel. Once you've gotten into the land, once you've settled in the land, and you've been there a while, will you forget that it was God that led you into the land? And you've got comfortable homes and you've got lives that are pretty good. And it's easy at that point to say, didn't we do this? I don't remember exactly how that happened, but I'm pretty sure, me and my father and my grandfather before me, we really worked hard. And so this is all just the fruits of our labor. And you've missed the whole thread, missed the whole story. And the same thing true broadly when it comes to political principles. The political principles that are going to found Virginia and the nation are ones that aren't self-executing and self-perpetuating. They require regular recurrence back to those principles, reminders and recommitments on the part of generation after generation, not only to these moral virtues, but also to the ideas behind them.
It's great. And then Principle 16 reminds me of a conversation we just had with our former student Joseph Holmes and former colleague Joe LeConte. We were discussing the question of whether America was a Christian nation. And that's spoken to here in Principle 16, where it's written that religion or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it can be directed by reason and conviction, not by force or violence, and therefore all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience, and that it is the mutual duty of all to practice Christian forbearance, love, and charity towards each other. And of course, later on, some 10 years later, there'll be the disestablishment of the state church in Virginia. But here you see clear recognition of Christian principles of forbearance, love, and charity are essential to hold this all together. And it's important, right, that this is the 16th and final principle. This is the closing principle that connects all others.
Right. And, free exercise, of course, is the exact language we're going to see in the First Amendment later on when that's attached to the U.S. Constitution. This is a critical principle, and on American soil, it goes back in many ways to the very beginning. But the idea that there ought to be opportunity for people to act according to their conscience in carrying out their religious obligations. And this is a very important thing for our own day, because what we often hear from the left anyway is, well, freedom of worship rather than the free exercise of religion. And those are two very different things. Freedom of worship means on Sunday morning or Sunday evening, you can gather and do whatever you want to do. But free exercise of religion has implications 7 days a week, has to do with how we think about marriage and how we think about education and how we think about the sexes and their relationships. So if we're going to say, well, you have freedom of worship or freedom of religion that really amounts to freedom of worship, we're really cutting back on what the founder understood to be the essential attributes of a true life of faith, because a life of faith isn't about what you do in a gathered worship service. Obviously, it includes that, and that's critically important. But it's much more than that. And you're a Christian, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And the founding generation recognized that in language like the free exercise of religion.
Right. So you'd see, public worship. You'd see not public, but the public exercise of religion, and you'd see it within the public square. And that was something that was going to be fully expected. And now I think there's, this attempt made to, in making the public square neutral, to neuter the exercise of religion within it, right? Which is, of course, the exact opposite of what the founders here of the state of Virginia are arguing. So summarize all the principles for us, Matt. What do we get out of this as we mean, we're about 3 weeks away from the Declaration of Independence. How does
Mhm.
Virginia kind of set the bar for other states?
When I would teach the Declaration of Independence at King's, I would often use this document as important context for the Declaration, again, because it does give you a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of some of these key phrases and arguments that are found in the Declaration. It has this profound influence on the other states, as we mentioned already, and really gives us, I think, a nice picture in summary form. Certainly, we've gone through the whole document in a half hour, but a nice summary form of the founders' thinking on why government comes about, how you establish a responsible and legitimate government, what that government should do, and the limits on that government's power. How do you perpetuate that government over time? So there's really, a whole political philosophy really embedded here, and it's nicely laid out. I mean, George Mason and the rest of the delegates there did a nice job of giving us a picture of American revolutionary thought circa June 1776 and laying down principles which are going to have an influence on the course of the American Republic for now 2.5 centuries. And so as we imitate them by recurring to first principles, going back to early documents and the statements of those principles, and we think about this as part of a recovery project of that republic, this is how it happens, how they're saying it's going to happen, and how we want to try to model that ourselves, and how we teach these documents and think about the applications in our own day. We're not trying to be antiquarians here. Neither of us has a PhD in history. We study politics, and how do you study politics well? You study politics well by going back and understanding good statements of principle, evaluating those, testing those, right, and working your way through those, and then thinking through the implications of those. And that's where we are in June now of 2026, just as they were in June of 1776. All right, well, we're going to wrap up the show as we always do with Tocqueville's crystal ball. So, NBA Finals did not entirely go the way we projected. I mean, the Spurs could have won all 5 games, so I guess in that sense we weren't entirely wrong. But apparently the Knicks are better at closing games out than the Spurs. That seems to be one irrefutable lesson from that 5 game series. David, did you watch any? Or do you have any thoughts on what
Yeah,
happened there?
watch them all. You could set your watch to it.
Yeah,
It turn into the fourth quarter, and then it'd be a nightmare.
yeah,
I don't know what the Spurs will do. I mean, they have a great team moving forward, but they need some sort of lead point guard who just kind of calms them down at the end and kind of gets them. Not they would have done well to have like a Derek White there, and DeAndre Fox is a great player, but it just wasn't his finest time, during the series. So
yeah.
they did, but they're like I said, they're in good shape. I think it'll be interesting to see whether the dynasty that people have predicted coming for the Spurs actually happens. So
Yeah, and again, I think just gives you more appreciation. We grew up in the Michael Jordan era, and you think about going 6 for 6 in finals, MVP everyone, never lost more than 2 games. It's just not easy, right? And
nope,
and
not.
even the greatest players and the greatest teams struggle. And so, yeah, I mean, Wemby may win 5, maybe he'll win 6, but he won't be 6-0. He won't be 5-0.
We were charitable at the Corbin household. We had some New Yorkers over, so we all sang New York, New York.
That was thoughtful
Biting
of you.
biting her lip. It was nice
Yeah.
though for them. That It had been so long since the New York team had won anything, so it's just like,
Right.
all right,
Easy to be
whatever.
charitable. Yeah.
Yeah, easy to be
Yeah.
charitable.
Well, last time we picked World Cup overall results, and early days, but so far so good for the Team USA. We'll see how it goes with the next match this coming Friday. But we were talking last time about how our only real success in these picks has been with football, and since there's no NFL, we thought, well, what about football?
Football.
So we used to do 5 NFL games a week, and we would do okay. By the end of the year, we'd usually be above 500 in our picks, and not horrible. So we're gonna try five soccer games, 5 World Cup games, and see if we can get the magic back. All right, so it's,
Okay.
it's
I
basically
like it.
one a day. What
We
Wednesday
need
to
something. We need something.
we need something exactly. One a day, Wednesday to Sunday. So first game Wednesday. This is a tough match. England against Croatia. What do you think, Dave?
I'm going with England 2-0. I think England 2-0. I
All
mean,
right.
and we have to use nil.
We must
There
use nil.
no
Absolutely.
zeros in this
No,
conversation.
no,
2-0.
absolutely not. All right. I've got England 2-1. This is a rematch of the 2018 semifinals, which were lost by England to Croatia, but the Croatian team has aged a bit since then. The English team is almost entirely turned over, other than Harry Kane. I think everybody else is new. So probably younger blood and probably enough to get the England squad over the line.
All right.
All right. Mexico against South Korea. Here's another interesting one.
And this is in Mexico, correct? So I'm
Yeah.
going to go with the home team. South Korea's got a good, we could call it squad. Is that what it is? Squad?
Yeah, or 11. You call them the 11. Yeah.
Good
Squad.
luck.
Yeah.
You know the words. I'm going with Mexico 2-1.
All right. I've got Mexico 2-0. I think the home field is going to help them. The star player on South Korea is Son Heung-min, and he was a great player for Tottenham for a number of years, but he's aged a bit. He's now playing for Los Angeles Galaxy, which usually is a bad sign. So I think their golden generation is a bit past its prime as well. So I think Mexico relatively easily defeats them.
You sound like you know what you're talking about, which kind of scares me a little bit here. But all right,
I'm trying anyway.
okay, all
All
right.
right. U.S. Australia on Friday in Seattle.
I'm going with the U.S. 3-1. I think that I couldn't believe they won 4-1 the other day, and I mean, if you get two 4-1, 3-1 scores, and I mean they would, I think, automatically advance from that point.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a lot of excitement, heading into that round of 32.
Yeah, I agree. I've got them also 3-1 over the Socceroos of Australia.
All right.
All right. So our Saturday matchup, interesting regional rivalry, Netherlands against Sweden.
I'm gonna go 2-2 draw here. I couldn't figure out. I mean, Sweden's always has a strong team. I love the Dutch. I forget what their nickname is. Something like Flying Orange or something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm going with a draw. How about you, Matt?
All right. Well, we go to a Dutch Reformed church, and there's really no hope for peace if the Dutch don't do well in the World Cup. So I'm going
Okay.
to take 2-0 Netherlands. I can't pick
Okay.
against them.
Okay. All right. Pressure. All right. Last one. Belgium versus Iran. What are you saying, Matt?
I've got a 1-1 draw. Iran's team is pretty good. And Belgium again is one of those that's kind of holding on to this group that was really good 4 years ago. So I think it could be a surprise there, and Iran in LA is able to secure the draw.
I don't know. Maybe this is a truth social or something, but I'm going 2-0 Belgium. I'm wondering what's going to come out of Truth Social on this match,
Yeah, keep an eye out for
especially
that.
especially if the treaties aren't signed.
Thank you
So
for your attention to this matter. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we'll see. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up the show for today. Next week, we got a lot going on. We got the Declaration of Independence, and of course, we'll be predicting the hot dog eating contest on July 4th, an annual tradition for the show.
Our biggest prediction of the year is the hot dog eating
It's the
competition.
biggest and the most important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, you can follow us at Instagram or YouTube, and you can email us at democracyinamericatoday@gmail.com. Look forward to talking to you again next week.